Hey everybody, welcome, and I hope you're doing well. Today is John. I can't believe it's Friday. I want the days to slow down. Everything's like the time is. Anyway, how you doing, John?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing?
I am blessed to have you. Hey, okay, now it can be revealed. Where are you?
I am in Georgia, my new home, where I moved to last week.
Welcome to Georgia, my man.
Loving it. I'm
I
loving it.
think, yeah, I think we are what about an hour apart, something like that, maybe less than that, maybe 30 minutes. We'll figure it out one of these days.
Yes.
You know, but you are a major Oaklander. So what was it that prompted the move? You know, why did you leave?
Ooh, good question. A million things. I'll start by saying this. So my family been out here for 20 years. My mother, my siblings, all except one. And I know a few years ago, my family and I, we were having conversations around what it would look like for us to obviously be reunited. And then obviously dealing with the global pandemic and then, me having kids, especially my youngest son, I started thinking about what's best for him and myself. But to be honest, a lot of that has to do with the current state of Oakland and where I see it going. And I don't see it going anywhere happy. I don't see it as a place where I want to raise my kids at. And ultimately, that's what made the decision for me to leave.
Wow. What was the aha moment where you said, "Okay, that's it. I'm out." Yeah.
Oh my! I think what really hit home for me. Okay, so when the pandemic first started,
Mm-hmm.
in March, I had issued, my real concerns, my warnings around the things that I thought was going to happen as a result. I'm talking about specifically an increase in gun violence, domestic violence, police brutality, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, and I spent all of last year trying to warn people about the violence. It seemed like it wasn't being taken seriously. So now we at a point to where it's out of control. And I'm talking about not like historic Oakland violence where one group is beefing with another and you know what's happening. This is out of control. It's too random. And for me, it was like, do I really want to raise kids in this environment? No.
Hmm. Wow. Is it? I got the impression because you and I talked about your posts on Twitter and everything, and that's why I invited you to post here. You have your own account as well. We'll get to that later, but we'll set you up too at some point soon. But I noticed it seemed to me that there was an increased volume of messages about all around. One particular subject that stood out was how white people in Oakland currently, and I'll explain why I say that, don't seem to understand the black condition in Oakland. And if I got that right, and so, and the other was just basically stupid things you see or have to deal with in the city from time to time, or with respect to the city, although you don't put them as stupid things. But I think, uh, in fairness, we have to also, that's the long term. We have to talk and make sure that somebody that sees us for the first time understands that you're not a bystander who just decided to leave and then broadcast it. You've had major roles in Oakland. You played a major part in establishing what is the most powerful Oakland Police Commission in existence right now. So, and talk about that for people who I think need an understanding of just how deep in Oakland and involved in Oakland you've been.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example because I think for me, what's important is in this moment and just to build upon, you sharing, like I've seen an increase in, let's say, new white people speaking. And I want
Mm-hmm.
to, everyone has a right to their opinion, but the opinion must be formed by historical context. So that was a large part of the work that I do, whether it's dealing with issues of the police, policing, housing, the rights for formerly incarcerated people. It's letting people understand the fabric of a city like Oakland. And we're losing that. And I'm saying that, for example, as I was speaking about the rise in gun violence, I think some people didn't take it serious because they wasn't here in the 80s and 90s when it reached its apex. Well, those of us who was here, that was a very scary time. So to see it happen again, it's like, double trauma. It's like, no. But then when you see what people talk about, when folks are calling in last year and they're saying, oh, the harm of policing and the harm of menthol cigarettes on Black and brown people. What about everything else? What about gun violence? What about housing? And to be honest, it gets tiresome. I don't think a lot of people, Zenny, understand that when we talk about the work we do, whether it's as an activist or organizer, whether as a reporter, it's not just work. Not when you know people personally who are impacted. My childhood friends, so carrying that weight too, it was just too exhausting. It was just too draining. So for me, I have to make some real decisions. But just to give you, just to go back to so some of your viewers can get a sense of some of the work I do and why I do it. I do it for that reason, as someone who understands it. Not something that I read about in the book. Like, you can't read about Oakland in the book. Nope. You got to go around to see it for yourself.
Talk about the process that led to the establishment of the Oakland Police Commission.
Absolutely. So OPD, long story short, has been under federal review for nearly 2 decades as a result of officers in West Oakland planting drugs on Black residents specifically. So while that was going on, about 6 years ago, OPD got caught up in what they call a scandal, with a young woman that was involved and a number of officers were having sex with this young person. And this is why, once again, the police is under federal oversight. You can compare that. I said that my analogy is that's similar to someone being on parole. When you're on parole, you're expected to go above and beyond to get off. You can't take these steps backwards. So that led to, we didn't have any trust in the city to deal with that because they were trying to cover it up, just to be real. And the story broke as a result of one of the officers involved who left a suicide note. So it just shows how deep that rabbit hole went. So,
by the way, just an editorial, Celeste Guap, who John is referring to, actually I interviewed. So if you are on Zenny 62 later, you can actually just search for Celeste Guap, and you can see the only direct interview that was conducted with her just after the time that happened. There have been others later after she got her lawyer, but I just happened to be lucky enough to track her down and online, and she gave me an interview. Well, go ahead, John. Sorry.
Yeah, and why you say this on a real quick, if I can say this about Celeste, she is an amazing human being. So for all the people want to cast judgment and talk about things she was involved with, check yourself. Don't do that. This was a young person. We all have our challenges, our struggles, and things we deal with. So I want to say shout out to Celeste. She's an amazing person. So with that being said, it wasn't an easy fight. I'm also a member of the Coalition for Police Accountability, who pushed very hard for this civilian-led police commission, which currently is the strongest in the nation. And for people who don't understand that, keep in mind that Chief Kirkpatrick, the former OPD chief, was fired as a result of the work that the police commission did, and the mayor made that agreement as well. So for me, that's where we got to look at when we just connect.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll wrap on this note. Just to connect with what's happening around the country as it relates to holding police officers accountable. That is a real need. That has to remain the focus. As long as there's a police force, we have to make sure, based on what I'm hearing from residents, Zenny, they want to make sure the police are not hurting nobody, and they want to make sure the police is doing their job. I feel like people dropped the ball in there. They lost sight of that.
Did you have a chance to talk to the current mayor and express your concerns? And how did that go, if you did, or did she meet with you?
You talking about the police or just in general?
Both.
It's been a while since I spoke to the mayor. I did see her at a press conference on 35th Avenue around the installation of what they call the speed cushions, because I'm also concerned about traffic and pedestrian safety issues. So I spoke briefly with her there, but I didn't go into depth. No.
Mm-hmm. And what about any other members of the Coalition for Police Accountability, or Cat Brooks for that matter?
I haven't had a conversation with Cat Brooks. There's different people that I remain in contact with, if that makes sense. So I want to be sure if you're talking about like me moving or issues of policing. These are two different things.
I was thinking about your moving and who you talk to say, hey, here's my move, or here's even not so much that you're moving, but people you talk to in an effort to try to resolve problems that weren't being resolved before you moved.
Yes, so that's ongoing. So I mean, I still have a network of folks that I would be working closely with on all these issues. But I mean, everyone has raised their I don't want to call it concern, but sadness, once I share with that I'm leaving. But I share with them that I'm still committed to the city of Oakland, and I will do whatever I can within my capacity to help. But at the same time, I have to realize what's the most important thing to me, Zenny, and that's my family.
Absolutely. Yep. That's
So, I'm someone I want people to understand that when I say the work I've done for the community, I wore so many hats and I gave so many countless hours, weekends, late nights. Like I gave so much, and there's a real sacrifice. I mean, you can lose relationships to this work. You lose time with your children. My youngest son about to be 7. And one of the things he told me, Zenny, was he said, "Daddy, you work too much." He told me one thing, I wish you were rich so you can stop working. And we can do these things, but at the end of the day, it's like I want to be present for his life to create memories. I don't want his memory of his dad to be just dad was working. So it's not it wasn't an easy thing, but it was the right thing, and I feel so good about it.
Yeah, don't turn around and be like me, so married to your work that you let just starting a family and getting married go by. Because my mom swears that I'm married to my work. She says you're already married.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh no. So, don't do that.
That's the last several years too. When you go settle down, I'm like, it's hard to form a relationship when you give so much of yourself, when there's really no boundaries. I want people to understand that too. I'm someone that's always accessible, Zenny. So when people in the community reach out to me and they say, "Can you help this young person who just came home?" or "This person is struggling with something," I think about my own experience. When I paroled in 2012, Zenny, for 18 months, I was home. Mm-hmm. And I was praying that if somebody had a resource or to point me in the right direction, if they had that power, what if they told me no?
Yeah.
So I give, but it does come at a price and a cost. It does.
We have some reactions here. Derek Sue, who's been on, he mentioned he lived just about Outlook Avenue in Oakland back during the early 80s into 90s, and he said he hated the gunfire. And then Corey Brown, who's a regular appearance here, he says, "Hello from Mesa, Arizona, Oakland original, off High Street in Fairfax. The neighborhoods just aren't what they used to be, not as safe, much less affordable." And then Derek says, "I applaud you, John. Family time matters." John, I'm going to tell you something that really bugs me. I was at the Planning Commission virtually, of course, and there's a building that I call King Kong. It's it really should be called the Thomas Berkeley Building. It's not. It's at 410 20th. It will be, if approved by the city council, the Planning Commission passed it on. It'll be the largest building ever built in Oakland. But at 864,000 square feet, with a multiplier of 250 square feet per employee, that translates to about 3,400 employees roughly. That's a lot of people to be dumped on who don't have housing or going to be coming from someplace else. Not only that, it's way out of whack with today, because I'm talking to you from home. The people that were doing the planning commission were doing the planning commission from their homes virtually. And yet we're approving a building that has no place that allows you to live unless you're going to live at your office. And so you're eventually going to be looking for housing and basically continuing to exacerbate the same pressures that created our gentrification problem. You would think that they would get it, right? Instead, they danced over it, said it was the government's problem, when in point of fact, they're representing the government. And it was the most anti-intellectual crap show I've ever seen in my life of a meeting. I thought, what has become of our city? And I even have, it's not a matter of color. You have black folks making the decision too. Okay. And I thought, what has become of our city where we don't seem to care about those who don't have anything, and we seem to have no problem with keeping intact and operating a system that creates these. Now, my answer was, hey, look, I'm not against the building, but put housing in it. Make it a live work. I even had someone arguing with me about that. I thought, what? So, you know what I mean? I can't put together why there are people in Oakland who are like this now. But it just seems like it's harder to establish a collective to do anything, but it's easier to establish a collective to stop something from being done.
Yeah, your name is one of my biggest frustrations in the city of Oakland. When I say a lack of leadership, I define leadership that's responsive to the immediate needs and the most immediate needs of the people. The number one issue in Oakland is not policing. It's the housing crisis for the thousands of people who are unsheltered and the tens of thousands or more who are literally paycheck to paycheck, spending 60 and 70%. And just to give you an example, I ain't even talk about when my rent is in Georgia. I don't want no one in Oakland to be depressed, but I'll give you an idea. So my former unit was just put back on the market, the place I just moved out of, and they actually raised the rent by $55 per month. So for me, when I look at housing, I always think of housing and employment as a twin tandem, because you need both, right? You need a safe place to stay and you need the means to be able to put food on the table. But I also look at, Zenny, diminished quality of life. It's not just about having somewhere where you got a roof over your head, because prison will provide that. What is the quality of life? What is it for people to do? How can people socialize and interact when things are shut down? And one of the things I've been saying for years, and you know this, like in East Oakland, we have movie theaters, a skating ring, a bowling alley. There was always something to do. And when my 18-year-old,
he's smart.
Dad, I'm bored. I'm like, what do you mean you bored? There's nothing to do. And I realized he's correct. There's nothing to do but get in trouble.
Yep. Yeah. Remember, we used to have Eastmont golfing games down at Coliseum. I was telling Mom about that because Malibu golfing games is here. And it just happened to pop up on the news and say, hey, Mom, we used to have that at the Coliseum. I haven't seen that in decades. It's like we have nothing for kids to do, but worse, we don't seem to care to provide anything. And John, this has been an ongoing problem for a long time.
A long time.
And I don't get it. And then what I don't understand is that there are people in Oakland who seem, it's like they're saying, hey, look, as long as the problems don't impact me, I'm okay. Or I had another friend who I'm not going to put out there, but I still am pissed off with this opinion. She and I had a conversation recently, and she said, I was talking to her about the last time that I was there to check on my place, which is 2019. I had actually rented a car, and the car was broken into on the side. And everyone says, well, I'm used to that. Well, wait a minute. I'm not. And I don't want to be used to it, you know? And she says, well, that's just part of she then recently said, that's just part of what it means to live in Oakland. I said, excuse me, you and I have been in Oakland a long time. I didn't accept it back then. Neither did you, but you are accepting it now. I'm not going to. And it's that mentality. It means that we're not going to have things fixed. And then somebody else said, hey, and they wrote this. I don't know who the person was, but they wrote, well, you know, we don't need the police. We can take care of this ourselves. You mean like vigilante? Open up the same kind of racism that Georgia was trying to get rid of when they made vigilante, you know, activities, basically citizens arrests, illegal. They did that just about a few months ago. So now you want to say in Oakland, you want to do that and say, oh, we can take care of it, not the police? That's not going to make things any better.
It hasn't. When I hear that, it pisses me off. Whoever say we keep us safe need to be fired. You're doing a horrible job. Things are working. So, I mean, you got shenanigans. It really comes down to this, Zenny. It's interesting. You know, we talked about this before. There isn't one Oakland. There's no monolithic community. There's like 6 or 7 different Oaklands. And what have been frustrating to me is, as someone who's in close proximity to East Oakland residents, I mean, on the ground, I socialize there, eat everything I do is there. I don't see the folks there who say they represent our city or our people. And this is why, and I don't know if that's intentional or not. I had folks tell me they was afraid to do outreach in East Oakland. So what does that mean? On one hand, you're afraid to come into East Oakland to talk to residents, but then on the other hand, you're saying police is not the answer. Talk to the residents here, because at some point in time, people need to be realistic. And the last thing I say is this, Zenny, and I've been warning people about this. Stop blaming COVID. COVID only exacerbated what already existed, but more to the point, created a new foundation of poverty and crime that's going to be here for quite some time. It is not going away no time soon.
Oh, by the way, for anyone watching and saying, hey, why is he looking down? I was putting this on social media as he's talking. Make sure people get the churn and everything. Hey, so something else that I just have to say it. I feel that black folks here are different than in Oakland, in Northern California. What I mean by that is this: even though there's a greater appreciation for black culture, and you would say part of it is the size of the population, but there are a lot of historic reasons for that. But my point is that in Oakland, we have had a wealth of historic reasons to have an appreciation for black culture, but it has never materialized. And as long as I can remember, going all the way back to when I started writing with Montclarian, um, there are people who never recognized that Oakland was also the hills and had a rich, deep culture. And I'm talking about people that didn't were largely white. But on the other hand, the folks who are black always spend a lot of time saying, well, okay, well, that side soul person is not me. And it is them. And then there was this attitude which went back to the same problem we talked about earlier, which was not making sure that there were enough things for kids to do. Like Festival at the Lake. I was there when the riot broke out in 1994. I covered it for the Montclarian. Was out there Sunday as the Lakers were playing the Bulls for the NBA title and Jordan was playing. Festival ended at 6. I remember Phil Tagami and I had tried to tell the Adams Point Preservation Society, which is an awful name because it sounds like they're like old school, plantation type. But at any rate, hey, keep the festival open until 8 because the sun goes down then. You don't have this gap between 6 and 8 where the kids have nothing to do. They didn't listen to us. What happened? Someone rolled up, cop rolls up Parkview Terrace. Dude throws a bottle at the cop car. Cop calls for backup. 8 cars come, and that's when it was on. And I remember coming out of the festival where like cops just basically facing off with kids. And I'm saying this is not going to go well, and it didn't. And the rest of the night was just it. By about 7 o'clock that night, they had an army of police forming a human broom. That's what I wrote in my column, going down Grand Avenue, basically arresting anybody in its path. They took an 18-year-old black woman who was pregnant on the corner of Perkins and Grand and threw her literally in the squad car. And in those days, we didn't have smartphones. I had to sit there and chronicle it and say, hey, what are you doing? And yell at them, I mean, it's like something in Oakland's DNA where it just actually seems to hate its black folks. And that includes the black folks. I'm just being honest. This is like, it's really whacked. And I can go on and on and on, but am I off base or on from your perception?
No, I agree. And the reason why is something that you named earlier. The process of normalizing things. What's considered normal? I think the oppression of black people has been so normalized to where folks don't even see it. And then some always tell people this, Zenny, to really understand the magnitude of the problems in Oakland, it really requires you to leave Oakland for a certain time period. Like I came out to Georgia earlier in April this month, and I was gone for like 2 weeks. Then when I flew back into Oakland, I'm like, it just you see it with fresher eyes, if that makes sense. When you go where like where I'm living at, I don't see the illegal dumping, like I don't see the same issues. Not that Georgia don't have its own issues, I want to be clear, but the things that's considered normal to the point to where people don't even want to talk about it, or the assumption is just deal with it, suck it up. That's part of Oakland. Even recently, I had somebody reached out to me from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right? And they said as soon as they pulled into Oakland, they went to Everett and Jones on Broadway. They didn't even get 10 steps away from the car before somebody tried to break in. And they were talking to people like they chasing people down. The person pulled out a firearm. So they're like, okay, they backed up. So then some other people came up and they was like, man, what's up with this? And the people said, oh, that's normal. That's what people do. They break into cars on Broadway. But then we talk about public safety. Like, what are we doing? Like, this is the city that we want to live in. This is a city we're supposed to be proud of.
Yeah. And then when we talk about defunding, it's like, well, who am I supposed to get to help me? And then people actually put on next door in other places, well, you can't get the police to respond. And they're calling for defunding. And then somebody else says, well, it's half the budget. But the point is, why? Okay, it's what bothers me. Again, this goes back to how we used to do things, and someone might call me boomer, I don't care. Because I am a boomer. But the simple fact of the matter is two things. First of all, we have a crisis of incompetence in city staff, and it's been going on. It started about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's only gotten worse. And they won't go back and ask people like me or anybody else, and a lot of us have died off or dying off, how we used to do things. My point is, we used to use redevelopment money or tax increment financing to fund security, to fund Oakland police, to fund city services, to fund community services. We even used it to remove crack houses in East Oakland. You would think the current group of people would say, hey, look, let's ask them how they did, or ask Henry Gardner. They don't. It's like they know it, and yet they do things like with Howard Terminal, and I'm not talking about whether it should be East Oakland or anything. It could be both for me, what I care. All I care is that they have the opportunity to fix a lot of problems with a legislation that would produce $1 billion revenue throw off and a potential for a bond issue between 500 and 700 million. And not to the A's, okay? But my point is that there's so much misunderstanding that they won't even bother to read the legislation that created what's going on now and go by it. Where it says, hey, set up another agency, which means the agency absorbs the debt, not the city of Oakland. So instead, you have a lot of people running around saying, oh, well, the city has to pay for this. Where does it say that? Well, in the past, I said, no, did you read the legislation? Did you actually read the damn thing? I mean, I'm just going to say this straight out. The level of stupidity is off the charts, okay? I mean, it is ridiculous. And this comes from a guy who, my job out of grad schools was with the city of Oakland as an intern, then a consultant, then mayor's aide, then, columnist. All right. I've seen Oakland from 5 different points of view, traveled and came back, watched it change, and it's not changing for the better. And the people there just seem like they're A-okay with it. And then people run for office. They run for office only to criticize somebody. But like in the District 1 example, the people that ran had no clue about how government worked. So they were reduced to character assassinations because that's all they had. Though, how does that help us?
See that? I mean, even quite frankly, with the whole reimagining public safety task force process, to me, the ignorance was revealed from the onset where, as they were talking about doing it, I flagged 2 things. One in particular is Measure Z. So to your point about understanding existing policies, the voters voted for Measure Z in 2014, right? It's a public safety ballot measure. And it had 2 clear provisions as it relates to police. The first is if the number of officers on the force dipped below 678, it would trigger a mechanism that would cease the collection of those parcel funds. And that's important because 40% of that go to community-based groups who are actually on the ground doing the work of interrupting violence. The second provision stated that if any time that the number of officers on the force is below 800, then the city can't lay off an officer. And I'm not mentioning the MOU that the city of Oakland signed with OPD, right? Because we had the recession of 08, we had 80 officers laid off, and 2012 was our highest homicide year. So it's like there's a tendency to chase headlines. It's to do things that's not even connected to what's on the ground. It's not connected to existing laws and policies. You have to do these things first. You have to do your homework and exercise some due diligence. That didn't take place. And then lastly, which is an important issue, whose voices is being centered? The task force came about because I called it out then. I heard over 100 white people call in talking about the harm of policing on Black and brown people. Who is talking to Black and brown people in East Oakland? I know I have, and none of them told me they want to get rid of the police or defund the police for that matter. We have to do robust engagement, walk people through. I always say when it comes to policing, to me, Zenny, there is a real relationship. I call it a symbiotic relationship between crime and violence and policing. And when people don't have viable solutions, they're just going to say, oh, well, the police is a problem. No, if you want to get rid of the police, it's your job to come up with the alternative. It's your job to sit down. They should have started that process with the people on the ground, Zenny, who actually do the work, who deal with gun violence, sex trafficking, domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. That didn't take place. So it created this gulf to where people was upset when residents were sharing. They didn't even understand what defund was. Because think about it. What does this say? There's nothing in that term that inherently makes one feel safe. All you hearing is get rid of police. That's too far fetched for a lot of people. And I'll say one last thing. When I look at who supports what, I'm gonna be honest. I call a lot of this, these are like tactics of white supremacy. Anytime there's silence on black people being killed, that's a form of genocide that somebody wants because somebody's benefiting from that.
Thank you.
So I got no problem naming that. That's what it looks like to me. That's why I've been speaking on it. We've seen the proliferation of media coverage as it relates to the attacks on Asian people. I'm black. I'm apologetically black and I'm unapologetically human. I spoke on both. But when we as a people see the silence as it relates to the erasure of our problems, it ain't just the police. It's a number of things. And we're not being centered. Our voices are not being heard. And nobody else can speak for us. We have to speak for ourselves. We just have to go back to loving each other, organizing with one another. That is not happening for whatever.
No, and what bothers me about that is in Oakland, like I was watching the Alameda Democratic Club meeting earlier this week, or just any Democratic political event. You know, where are the black men? You know, the black men are scarce, and no one is saying, hey, look, we need you to recruit black men to be elected officials. Okay? I'm saying it.
Yeah.
I thought and I've been on Emily's list for years. I contribute, but I thought, you know what, we need an Adams list or a Tyrone's list, basically to recruit black men, because what does Emily's list do? It recruits women for public office. But there is no black equivalent. None. And the simple fact that there is no black equivalent and no cacophony of voices calling for one is exemplary of what you and I are talking about. It's like, hey, look, you don't like black folks? What's up here? And this is even among us, right? So there is, and I will say this, I believe social media, and I want to get your response on this, has really done a damage to us, because when I came up, when I was 6 years old, 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, okay, I was reading The Art of Walt Disney. I was reading about Disney is what got me into city planning. But I had 600 books and magazines, no social media. I had nothing to tell me I didn't matter as a black person. But a young person today gets a different message through social media, a young black person. And John, I think it's damaging us. I think it's damaging society for us in a way that's not for us. I should say it's damaging society in a way that's not for us. Your thoughts?
I'll tell you right now, it's by design. I felt that myself as a black man. I'm like a black man born and raised in East Oakland, have all these experiences, and then you have people who find ways to try to marginalize you for their own ego, self-gain, whatever the case may be. And something I've been noticing that really pisses me off is like, only time I really talk about black men is really in two situations. One, if we're killed by the police, or number two, if we're the quote unquote perpetrator. That's it. Like I even said this with George Floyd. Look at all the people, they would make so much money off his name, don't know anything about his life, his struggle. Don't define that man through the narrow lens of the white officer who stole his life. He was much more than that. And I see this so often, but it goes back to me. I've been noticing these things for quite some time, Zenny. A lot of things I don't speak on because I know sometimes it takes people a while to catch it, but people are catching this. So let's go back to white supremacy, this mythical term that people use as a band-aid for anything, right? Poverty, oh, white supremacy. Let's talk about how it really works. Or at least from my perspective, how I've been seeing it work in the context of this movement in Oakland. So anytime, see, there's some people who they want to center their own needs. I'm talking about white people. But they can't use whiteness as the entry point because whiteness is vilified under white supremacy. So they began to reinvent themselves through different terminologies. For example, white women. We have to talk about the role of white women historically and what's happening today. Real impact. So if you use gender as the entry point, then guess what? Oh, I'm not white, but I'm a woman. So I've seen that there's efforts to organize black women along lines of gender, and then that definition got expanded to include our neighbors and friends and relatives in the LGBTQ movement, right? So they create dynamics to where, although a lot of these issues that folks are paid to work on disproportionately impact black men the most, black men still find themselves being the enemy to these groups. And it's sad. Talking about social, like all the bashing I see
called
as a
demasculization.
yes, and it's like all these things, people come up with terms, and you can't do this, and then you have an opinion, and this cancel culture. I'm like, who is creating this? And ultimately, who is it going to benefit? Who is it going to elevate? See, it's the same thing like America. The whiteness in this culture has a tendency to repackage our history. We've seen that with Malcolm X. We've seen that with Dr. King. Dr. King was not beloved the last 3 years of his life. He was not widely revered. He was hated and ostracized. But what they do, they'll kill off our leaders and then repackage them into this safe and sanitized version that's going to advance their goals. I tell people, look at what Malcolm X did. Malcolm X organized black people. Same thing with the Panthers. Most people talk about the Black Panthers. They understood the importance, Zenny, of organizing who they call the lumpen proletariat. That's our brothers and sisters who operate on the fringes of the American social economic order, or in today's parlance, the thug, the pimp, the prostitute, whatever name it you want to use. The point is, if we're not centering us, as opposed to whatever other people are willing to support. That's why I say, if you pay attention, like I said to Oakland, look at this, the move to ban menthol cigarettes. If we want to say cigarettes are harmful, why not ban all cigarettes? Why is it something that's targeted around black people? And it's targeted under the guise of, oh, we want to look out for the health of black people, as opposed to look at the sources that's causing, what is the source of the stress? Because that's secondary. Alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, that's secondary. That's not the primary issue. Address the primary and you would get to the secondary and the tertiary issues. But once again, how things are packaged. And even I'll say the last thing, language. What they use now, what is it, BIPOC? I hate that term. Like black, indigenous, people of color. What does that even mean? Because first of all, you're only highlighting black people and then indigenous people. So if you're Middle Eastern, where are you at? You just lump into a person of color? And for us as black people, our elders, our ancestors were called colored. That's offensive. That's why I'm referring to myself as a person of color. What's wrong with us focus on as a community, as a tribe, as a nation? What is wrong with black people focus on the issues that really and truly matter to black people by having black people in that space? Our values should never be driven, Zenny, by what the media is publishing. It should never be driven by what's coming out of City Hall. We have to be the ones to drive that. And
I just want to add something real quick regarding the media. Media is us too. We're making it. But what bothers me is that the perception of the media is white only, and that perception is given on a per second, multiple times per second day basis. Now, in my case, that's why I insist on this platform. Now, someone would say, well, Zenny YouTube is owned by this. Yeah. But Zenny 62 Media is owned by me. And as my good friend and advisory board member Mark Cantor informed me, your multi-platform approach is yours, nobody else's. So I own my own media, but I'm a black guy who owns 70% of a company who is routinely ignored by, like, for example, people who are involved with the anti-police terrorist project. Some of them, they'll talk about the plight of black folks, but they won't. If I say, hey, look, send me a press release, I get nothing from them. If I reach out to talk to them and one of them is now our council member, they'll ignore me. And they'll ignore me because, okay, Sam Singer's my friend or whatever. And yeah, I admit that. I have a lot of friends that other people may not like. But if I have a gigantic system that I built as a black person, and I'm saying, hey, look, use it with me as you're using it and everything else, why not take me up on that? But what they'll do is they'll say, oh, he doesn't want to talk to us. He doesn't think like us. But what they'll do in some type of weird game is basically ignore that I'm out there or try to, right? And who does it help? It doesn't help anybody black. It doesn't help themselves. It's the one of the biggest, not the only, but one of the biggest examples of this nutcasery that goes on that I've ever seen. Or if it's somebody white, sometimes, not every white person, of course, but they'll say, well, you're not a journalist. No, I'm not. I'm a blogger, proudly, because as I say, journalism is advanced white supremacy. Why? You say talk to both sides, which means I have to talk to somebody I know is a nutcase that's evil, that's trying to exterminate me. As opposed to saying, hey, look, what a blogger does, hey, look, that's bad. What you guys did was bad. I don't like that. And therefore, here's my view, okay? This happened very recently. in a Facebook group I'm not going to mention, and I only use Facebook, or try to distribute my content. And the reason is I feel that text-based communication alone causes you and I to look into and read something through our own insecurities. Our talking this way, we've imparted a lot of information within seconds you cannot do by text, right? And we see each other and the context and everything else. We get it within microseconds. You can't do that with text. And yet people do it on a Facebook and they get mad when you don't engage them that way. And if they're not a Facebook friend of mine, 97% of the time what they have to say to me is negative. Okay? And it's nuts. Absolutely nuts. And so what happened was that they were talking about something that David D actually got involved in and wrote a piece that I bought from him to post, because the mayor had brought a group of white parents, both basically, down to some sort of rally at the lake, and it was presenting one point of view. And so David D was asking, where are the black parents? Are you talking to anybody? And would you believe 2-3 people, not one, but actually 4 people on the Facebook group said, why are you presenting? One of them openly said, I don't want to hear a black perspective. This person wrote this in black and white, John, okay? And I blocked them. I said, hey, you know what? That's racist. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to see that. You're saying that you don't want to read that because this person is saying they're black and here is their perspective. What do you think you're hearing from the other way? All right. And then what happens is they'll say, hey, look, whenever that comes up, they say, well, you're not being a journalist. But it's always about content that just so happens to be negative against somebody black. All right. I've taken a diary and a tally of this stuff. It is absolutely nuts. And they'll be the first to say, I'm not racist. I blocked that person. Then I had somebody else, I'm not going to mention who's a friend, who at one point ran for at large against Rebecca Kaplan, called me, private messaged me and said, will you unblock this person? And I said, hey, I said, look, no. Why? First of all, I'm not going to engage in Facebook that way. I don't. Second of all, that is a race issue. Well, this person is really nice. So how do you know you actually know this person? They'd never met him. But see, the person reflected that other person, who was also both white, that person's point of view. And so it's become this descent into, and I'm using that term again, nutcasery, that I've never seen before in Oakland's history. And it's scary.
Yes, absolutely. And just how one of the issues in other words, by the time you find yourself go to you understand that other people who look at the world differently from desires. At some time, you have to cope with it. That don't mean be whatever, but what it means is create space for someone to have a difference in opinion. And to your point, where it gets harmful at is on matters of, because I've encountered that myself. There are some white people who feel comfortable to speak on issues that deal directly with the black community. Part of the reason why they feel comfortable to do so is because there's folks out there organizing them and encouraging them to do so. See, I always believe this. Anytime people say things like, who's your base? My base is people I know, Zenny. Because this is war. When we talk about anti-blackness, that's a war that's been going on for 5 centuries. So I need to know, who am I in the trenches with? Right? That means I have to build relationships. I got to get a sense of who you are, where your politics, what's your values and views. We don't have to agree on everything in common, but as long as I have enough understanding of where you stand, we can make it work. There's a lot of people speaking up on things and don't know what the hell they're talking about, and don't have the humility to even accept that. So they lash out like children, which is very immature.
Yeah.
Right. So you see it. I'm like, well, you call it nutcasery, but it is. To me, it's a real form of mental health issues that people have that they need to deal with and address seriously, because it's gotten out of hand.
Yeah, it should be from where it has to come from a place of love. And I think that's what all this is about. There are a lot of people actually willing to hate rather than love.
Yeah.
And in a second, make that, like, I went to defensive of the mayor because I said, hey, look, I've known the mayor for 30 plus years. I disagree with her about this and that, but she is my god sister. But also, I don't advocate anybody storming her house and throwing projectiles at it because you have a disagreement with her. And if I put that out there are people who, get upset with me for defending her. I am not going to stop defending Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf. She is my longtime friend. I got a spine, and I'm using it. Okay, period. End of story. But to allow a situation where a person could be harmed physically, it's no wonder, Keisha Lance Bottoms just announced yesterday she's not going to run for mayor again. And this is going on around the country.
Yes.
I mean, we're descending. What bothers me, John, is we're descending into a place where we are going to be the target of another attempt to have an authoritarian government. Because there are too many people arguing among themselves about little things, more willing than not to have a kumbaya with you, more unwilling to have a kumbaya with you than to be at odds with you. And at some point, this has got to come to where it got to us with President Trump, where we were manipulated, and then you had a group of us as Americans who wanted to storm the Capitol and stop the election. And a lot of them hadn't even voted. And that's where we are today. And a lot of them white supremacists. It's the conditions that scare the hell out of me. To a point where sometimes, I love staying in and creating media and everything else. And I'd rather not go out, which is a bad thing. You know why? Because there are a lot of beautiful people out there. But the beautiful people are too damn silent.
Some of this is about platform. That's why I'm grateful for your platform. Because honestly, there's people who have a voice who do speak, that do the work. They don't get the limelight. You know what I mean? This Oakland is driven by self-interest, and it's driven by petty feelings. Once people get in their feelings, they feel like you hurt their feelings, they want to write you off. And to your earlier point, like for me, I always say this: what I do, Zenny, is a labor of love. I love my people. I love my community. I'm not rooted in hate, because hate is not that tears you up. That becomes a health issue.
Yeah.
I love Black people more than I hate the police. That's why I'm willing to have a conversation, as I did with the last 3 chiefs in particular, for that reason. What can we do to make sure we stop Black people from being pulled over and Black people from being hurt and harmed? Someone has to be willing to have those real conversations. It just can't be I hate y'all, I'm never going to talk to y'all. Like, that's childish, juvenile behavior. And it doesn't advance the needs of the community. To me, that's just more ego-driven. People have to humble themselves. And I see too much of that in Oakland. And it's strange to me, because I always said it as someone born and raised, like, you can't tell me anything about my city. Not like that, but I mean, I'm trying to be real. Like, look, we can dialogue, but don't tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about when I have these personal experiences. And the only thing you know about my city is what you read in the book.
That's right. No, yeah.
And I even did this, Zenny, like I said, position was years in the making. I seen it coming. So for years, I've offered myself and my connections to anybody. If you're a community-based organization, if you're an activist, look, I can introduce you to some folks that you can talk to that can help advance the cause. People wasn't willing to do so. That's why I say, if you really care about the community, you'll do so. Because me, it's simply, like something that my family always told me. Like, when you go to school and when you go to work, you don't go there for friends. You go there to get the job done. Now, if I can become friends in the process, that's a bonus. But that's not why I do it. So in other words, I'm willing to work with anybody. I don't have to like you. We don't have to go to a movie together. Right? But I have the ability and the willingness to work with anybody to advance the needs of the community. And when certain people shut the door on that, then I let you know they're not doing it for the community, they're doing it for themselves. So at that point, I don't even spend a lot of time talking about them, because the truth always comes out. It always comes out, and it will always set you free.
Hey, I got to ask you, and also, first of all, welcome to Zenny 62. I'm going to give you stock. I want you on our advisory board, and as we grow, I want you to grow with us, because we cannot lose. You already have the platform, because you can fire up your smartphone anytime you want to, but I need to walk you through that.
Absolutely.
And I want to formalize that. So I gotta, and I want to say welcome to Georgia, as a guy who's bi-coastal, who still lives at Adams Point in Oakland, and I love Oakland. And what do you see yourself I mean, I know your life is going to be fundamentally different here because you have family all over. But are you going to go and try to meet Senator Warnoff and Ossoff, or get involved, or how are you able to divide your time?
Good question. So there's some things I want to do in the near future. I just want to take some time out to reflect on what's next. I got some ideas, and I'll share that with you as they come into fruition. So to be clear, I feel like I'm at a point now where I want to download a lot of my knowledge and experience. Nearly a decade of organizing and being an activist in Oakland. I think there is so many important things that need to be shared. And another thing I want to focus on, I began that process, is really, Zenny, what's needed is leadership. When I say leadership, once again, I'm talking about impacted residents who are multifaceted. To use a baseball analogy, 5-tool players, people who can do more than just speak for 2 minutes, people who have deep relationships within their community. Because we've seen that with the advance of COVID, right? A lot of community-based organizations was claiming, this excuse they were using, they couldn't really do outreach because of COVID. Well, if you already had a base in East Oakland, you wouldn't have to rely on, you can use COVID as an excuse. You should have a database of people's numbers in your phone. You should know who to call and where to go. So that's the group I'm trying to focus on, as they are, because just like I say, the impact of not just COVID, but just all these other factors is last longer. And God forbid an earthquake come, because Oakland is not right to deal with something that magnitude.
No, we used to, and that's the thing. I think I realize this now, but when I came to work for the city of Oakland, Oakland was ran by African Americans, and people used to make fun of Oakland until they visited Oakland. I mean, people who were white, lived in San Francisco. And I remember when I was brought in to be a columnist with Montclair, and people were shocked because, oh, they had a black guy. It's white, it's Hills, right? But what got me then was that there was a collective of people in Oakland that realized that, hey, of course we had our problems here and there. And there was a media that was white ran that all too often tried to make anybody that was black in charge look like they were corrupt. But the trash got picked up. The sewers worked. People were paid. Our education system always had its problems, but there was a collective effort to make it better. Not that there isn't now. All right, not that there isn't now. There is. But Oakland worked better. And we had elected officials, regardless of color, who understood the collective of Oakland in a way that I believe, might say our elected mayor, public officials, people that are higher, not the elected, but I believe is lacking today. And so, and that needs to be clarified. I'm used to a city that was black run that worked well, and it did. It really did. And I think that's what jars me today. I'm thinking, what is it that well, that's it, that's really it. It's a friend of mine said it about being here in Georgia. He said that the reason why he liked to stay in Atlanta was because he was used to and liked to see someone with a title, and you found out that person was black, and that was normal. As opposed to, well, the black person is maybe somebody who's not a millionaire or billionaire, and there's something else. And while that's changing in the Bay Area for us, here you do have a wide diversity of people who look like us, right? And a level of integration that's taken for granted by a media that's all too focused on dividing us by race, So I think you've got some other stuff on your schedule. Because I looking back there.
Yes.
Let's get some of the comments here before Derek was saying that, and he says kids don't have anything to do. Then he adds, fix the assumption can be a simple solution. Charles in Oakland says, Derek says far from a simple solution or single one, the cost is still being estimated. And he says that we're talking about the level of, and then he says Oakland isn't prepared for any emergency. That's too bad. John, Hey, welcome to Georgia. And are you going back to Oakland anytime soon, or are you like, I mean, like, even to visit, or you still have stuff you have to get, or what's going on?
Going out there periodically. Like I said, I still got a ton of family members and friends out there. So, know what they say. It ain't goodbye.
Yeah. And it's just
But it is later.
We'll stick around in the backstage. Hey, folks, thanks for sticking around. Mr. Sue and Mr. Charles, thank you for your comments. That ends this broadcast. In 1 hour, we will have longtime friend and sports agent, Patrick Mahomes' agent, Lee Steinberg, coming on. So stick around and subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube if you haven't already. That ends this broadcast. Stick around in the background, John. Thanks again.